All right, without any further ado, we often hear about our porous borders. It's certainly become a hot button issue in our politics. But border management is so much more than just migration. There are so many aspects to it, from health to the environment to agriculture and, of course, migration being a key pillar. So someone who is at the forefront of efforts to secure our borders, but specifically, of course, for our purposes today, to disrupt illicit trade through integrated enforcement and data-driven action is our next speaker. Would you please put your hands together for Dr. Michael Masiapato, the Commissioner of our Border Management Authority.
Under normal circumstances in Africa, a greeting gets responded to. Colleagues, good day. Yeah, so at least it gives me comfort that I'm actually warm. Colleagues, let me start by appreciating this opportunity and of course the invitation by B20 to really come and have a bit of conversation with yourselves in terms of the work that is done by the Border Management Authority within the context of the issues that we are effectively dealing with. Let me also appreciate the program director, Bongani, for this opportunity. He told me that I have explicitly 20 minutes, and I will definitely make sure that I comply in as far as that part is concerned. So, and of course, appreciating Cas, the big chief in the business space, being present in this assembly is also highly appreciated. So effectively, colleagues, on the basis of this particular conversation, I thought I just needed to start by reflecting a bit in terms of what is the Border Management Authority, something that Bongani had started to reflect on, which is very much fundamental. A Border Management Authority in South Africa is a new entity of the state that has been created to take charge of the management of the borders within the Republic of South Africa. You will fairly remember that at the point of transition in 1994, almost for 30 years as a country, we have deployed or used what is called a multi-agency approach in as far as border management is concerned, which effectively meant that we had a multiplicity of government departments and a lot of other entities that would have sent people into the port environment to implement various pieces of legislation. So what we basically observed over the years was the fact that that kind of an approach, it is very much, or it was very much not that cost effective, but it was also very much inefficient, primarily because you will find that if you were to go to any port before the BMA took over and you wanted to know who is in charge, you were going to be confronted with something like 7 different port managers from different disciplines that were responsible for their own area of work. That particular approach has created a lot of fragmentation. It created a lot of silos, but also very much underutilization of the resources of the state. And that is why there was this move to establish a single authority in the form of Border Management Authority, fairly having the responsibility, according to Section 5, subsection A, B, and C, to facilitate and manage the legitimate movement of people and goods, but also to collaborate with other structures and other stakeholders in the entire ecosystem in as far as border management is concerned. So fairly, that is what the BMA is. As we speak now, we are responsible for this work across the 71 ports of entry in the Republic, and those 71 ports of entry are interpreted as 52 of those are land ports of entry, 10 of those are international airports, and 9 of those are seaports. And of course, we talk about 8 conventional seaports, and the 9th one is a dry port, which is in Siridip, here in Johannesburg, which is fairly where we bring the consignment that are destined to the continent as part of the value chain. But more critically, over and above working within the port environment, we are also responsible for the implementation of over 28 pieces of legislation in as far as border management is concerned, and our work cuts across the entire borderline in terms of land. That is over 4,770 kilometers of the borderline, but we only work 10 kilometers into South Africa, and that is described as a border law enforcement area. Similarly, we have a responsibility to secure our coastline from a border law enforcement point of view, and that is obviously 3,900 kilometers, and of course we work 10 kilometers into South African land, but we also work 12 nautical miles into the sea. So that is basically the kind of a space that we are effectively working on. Now, within the context of the conversation today, I want to talk about two critical issues that are very much fundamental, obviously within the context of the theme that has been put through in terms of this conversation, which is about collective action against financial crimes. And what we know is that financial crimes are something that is, very much sophisticated. It is something that I do know that it involves people that some of them went a bit to school. It's not just basic crimes per se. When I was young, I worked for the structure within the South African government system called the Financial Intelligence Center. Part of my responsibility there was to deal with what you will call your organized criminals, deal with issues around your commercial crimes, as it were, but also deal with issues of your money laundering as well as issues of terrorist financing. So within that particular context or that particular experience, one is able to bring it within the context of the border management space, where one is basically responsible in as far as this particular work is concerned. So let's start by reflecting on the problem statement before I move to reflect on the solutions that the Border Management Authority has been implementing in the past 2.5 years of BMA's existence, but more critically, reflecting on the future state and future plans that we are going to be bringing in the ecosystem in terms of making sure that we are able to do things that are supposed to be done, but obviously things that are also done by other jurisdictions in other parts of the global environment. The problem statement in the South African context is very much clear, and I think Bongani did start and say we've been sitting with an environment of what we call porous borders. One thing that we can fairly agree within that context or that particular concept is the fact that that has been the reality. And of course, that has been the problem statement that we needed to do. As we speak now, arising from that particular reality, we are dealing with a very serious, unfortunate situation of illicit economy within the jurisdiction. I think those that went to school in as far as economics is concerned will tell you that the South African economy has been strangled between 1% and 2% from a growth point of view. What we are not able to tell, because we do not have data, is the fact that how has illicit economy been growing. But one thing that we can indicate is the fact that it has been growing, in as much as we are not able to put very explicit figures in as far as that part is concerned, because it is an environment that is fairly illegal in terms of its activities, but its posture. But one thing that we can indicate with some of the snippets of data that we have is the fact that South Africa is losing around 100 billion annually in as far as illicit trade is concerned. And that is one thing that we can be able to affirm and be able to confirm within the context of the work that we do from a border management point of view. What we can indicate, for instance, if we talk about the BAT team, is the fact that the illicit cigarettes within our jurisdiction is actually in an environment that is very much problematic. And I want to indicate that the colleagues did indicate when we had a conversation with them that we are sitting at a state where actually the cigarettes that are being smoked in our jurisdiction almost 75% of those, as they are being sold, even in our informal economic environment, are fairly illicit, to the extent that they are actually just sitting in between 20-25% in terms of the entire share, as it were. And I think that is one of the most fundamental challenges that, as a jurisdiction, we have to be dealing with. And again, in mapping the problem statement, I also want to indicate that the move in as far as illicit economy, in as much as it has actually started in the textile environment, something that we are fairly aware of as we speak, most of it obviously coming from the Asian side into our jurisdiction, we now know that there is actually a move into various other areas of the economy. For instance, we have seen a very serious move in terms of the movement of illicit, what you will call liquor, into our jurisdiction. One of the most scary realities that we are dealing with as we speak is the serious movement, even in terms of what you will call medication, into the environment, to the extent that you have a situation where a lot of your illicit medicine is being flocked into our jurisdiction, to the extent that it actually gets used or gets sold even in our spaza platforms. And we know what that means under normal circumstances. If people are actually going to take a Panado or take some kind of a disprin, thinking that this is supposed to be, assisting them, only to find that it is actually exacerbating their condition, is very much problematic. So from a problem statement point of view, we want to indicate that we are sitting in an environment where something very serious, something very drastic actually has to be done. In as much as I do know that when we talk about border management, there is sometimes an articulation that is brought into the value chain, which is kind of either academic, sometimes a bit intellectual, but sometimes also a bit spiritual, to argue that we do not need borders, or even sometimes to argue within the context of Pan-Africanism that actually we are one continent, we are actually one country, we therefore do not need borders. And I think those are some of the articulation that sometimes stifles the value chain. But one thing that we can indicate, very much fundamental, there is a very critical role that has to be played within the context of border management. And before I conclude on the problem statement, I want to indicate this particular reality. Part of the responsibility we have is to protect South Africa from an agricultural biosecurity point of view, effectively making sure that we protect this republic from the movement of agricultural products, whether it's animals and their products, whether it is plants and their products, to the extent that we don't have any invasive kind of a plant that will enter our jurisdiction and effectively have a negative impact in terms of our entire agricultural ecosystem. That is the essence. Secondly, we have a responsibility of actually implementing what you will call environmental biosecurity in the environment, making sure that we protect this republic from invasive species coming into the jurisdiction. Very much critical. Those of yourselves who had been exposed to a dam called Hartebees, you will be aware of one of the invasive species that has actually taken over that site. As we speak now, even as the entire ecosystem, we are struggling to undo that particular plant. We do not know where it comes from. And as we speak, it is actually stifling our entire environment. It is actually expanding beyond just that particular space. It is going into other areas where there is some water in the value chain. That is the responsibility that we also have as a border management authority. But at the same time, we also have a responsibility to protect the republic from the issues of the importation, either wittingly or unwittingly, of what you will call infectious or communicable diseases. It is for that reason that we have a responsibility to make sure that everybody who enters our jurisdiction, we have to scan them within the context of your temperature rate, but also any other kind of a possible challenge within their own system, so that we're able to protect the republic from all of those kind of issues. It is for that reason that we also have a requirement when you actually try to arrive in a port space and say, you are coming from a yellow fever infested country. For you to be admitted in our jurisdiction, you must prove that you have actually been vaccinated against yellow fever, and that is why we will require a yellow fever certificate. All of these things are the work that are actually, or is all of the work that is being done by the border management Management Authority in making sure that our ecosystem is effectively protected, not only for South Africa, but for the entire continent, as you will know, in terms of the North-South corridor. In that instance, when I get to that particular space, our scanning capability as a jurisdiction is 0.05, effectively meaning that more than 99% of the consignment entering our jurisdiction, we do not know what is inside there. So from a problem statement point of view, that is the first intervention that we need to do. And that is why we are actually working with our government people that actually carry the pairs to be able to assist us to procure latest technology from scanning capability so that we can be able to make sure that as those consignments arrive at the port level, we are able to have a full scan and ultimately be able to implement our risk modeling and be able to deal with those that are trying to bring things into the country, whether in the context of illicit economy, but also even in the context of narcotics and all of those other issues that are very much fundamental. So those are some of the interventions that we have done. Now, if we can then look at the movement of what is described as porous borders within the context of the land port, we do know, if we talk cigarette, but also other kind of things, our northern border is the biggest challenge. As we speak now, we are able to say, just in our existence period, we've been able to stop illicit cigarette to the value of $1 billion. And we've been able to get those out, and we had to get those destroyed. And that is basically a continuous activity. Those that are moving those cigarettes are not ordinary. These are people that are highly sophisticated, highly armed, and they move from 1 in the morning until around 2:30. And we basically deal with those situations. But of course, as the Border Management Authority, we actually get assisted by our colleague from the South African National Defence Force, together with our colleagues from the South African Police Service. That is a continuous fight. As we speak now, that is what is actually happening laterally on a daily basis. So we will be issuing our second quarter statistics. You will be able to see how much have we been able to intercept in that particular environment in as far as illicit cigarettes is concerned. So those are the kind of issues that we are dealing with. What are the other things that we are starting to do as the Border Management Authority? We have started actually bringing in technology. We have procured drones that we are actually putting on the air and be able to monitor our actual vulnerable areas. In this instance, our biggest target is the northern border, followed by our eastern border with Mozambique. Those are our 2 critical areas of concern. We do have some issues centrally with Lesotho, but mainly those issues that side are not, in terms of categorization, is the movement of a bit of dagga. We'll deal with that. Bit of the issues of your cross-border crimes in terms of the stock theft and all of those. But the biggest challenge we are sitting with is the northern border with Zim, eastern border with Mozambique. And those are the issues. Kosi Bay, biggest challenge. Libombo, biggest challenge. We have also seen some bit of shifting towards our western border on the side of Grobler's Bridge. But all of these issues are mapped out. From where we are sitting, technology is indeed something that we are putting on the table to make sure that we put it on the ground and make sure that when we respond more decisively, consciously, but in a targeted manner as we speak. Up to this point, we can indicate that from a Border Management Authority point of view, we've been able to nab around 140 individuals that we describe as the key facilitators, either for illegal migration or actually the movement of illicit goods into our jurisdiction. As we speak, those individuals, whether South African or otherwise, we don't even deport those that are from other jurisdictions, but we have to put them through our system. Because when we actually deport them, they actually don't necessarily face anything on the other side, but they actually come back and they continue with the activity. And those are the kind of things that we are doing. In terms of illegal migration, we've been able to stop around 495 million individuals who had been trying to come into our country illegally. But at the same time, we know among that value chain, obviously there are those that are ordinary vulnerable individuals, but we are able to deal with those separately. We deal with issues of your human trafficking, but also issues of human smuggling. And those are the kind of challenges that we are dealing with, and they are very much serious as we speak. So our jurisdiction still remains as one of the countries that actually has a serious pull factor, as it were, and that is why there is this flood. But we are doing our best in dealing with all of the issues. The last thing that I want to talk about is the issue of trade facilitation. We know for sure, and I think we have seen, those of yourselves that had been observing, we actually inherited an environment where our ports of entry were built during the apartheid times In terms of geography, they were built to make sure that they actually squeeze everything. They were not meant to facilitate serious traffic. They were not meant to even facilitate number of people, neither trade. Therefore, on that particular basis, if you check, they are either put on a bridge or on a river in the context of Beit Bridge, Grobelaar's Bridge, or Marcelo Bridge, over the Limpopo River or the Caledon River. If it is not there, it's put on, actually on the mountain cliff for the purposes of security. That is how it was built. And that is why now we are actually moving to the extent that our top 6 land commercial ports are going to be redesigned and redeveloped. And we now have at least what you'll call private partners that are going to come and assist us through a public-private partnership, and the construction will be starting next year. To the extent that they're going to open up the port, we will have lanes for the trucks. The future vision, in as far as border management is concerned, particularly for the movement of trade, we do not want any truck to actually stop at the port. What is going to happen is that our colleagues from the South African Revenue Service will do all the clearance inland. They will be able to put in the seals, and will be able to monitor the truck through satellite provision as it goes through to the port to make sure that there is no any interruption or any kind of interference in terms of the consignment. And when it gets to the port, there is going to be a lane just for the traders, and we are actually, as we speak now, working on authorized economic operators. We are working with our colleagues from SARS, and all of those, what we will call trusted, freight forwarders are going to be listed, and none of their trucks are going to be stopped at the port. They will be able to move on the other side. For those 6 top commercial ports, is Beit Bridge to Zim, is Libombo to Mozambique, it is Oshuk to Eswatini, it is Maseru Bridge and Fikberg to Lesotho, but also Kofontaine to Botswana. Those are the 6 that we are going to open up in terms of redesigning together with our private partners. So those are the kind of issues that we are actually doing from a border management point of view. As we speak now, we inherited a situation where trucks will be queuing on the N1 to Beit Bridge for 2 weeks. They'll be queuing on the N17 into Eswatini for some week. They'll be queuing on the N4 into Libombo for some, week and all of that. And now I can indicate that in terms of our latest time release study, just for N17 to Oshuk, we've been able to reduce the waiting period from January to date. We had the latest assessment, and now we are talking about 20 minutes as the waiting time to cross over into Oshuk. And as I'm talking to you now, I will be going to Lesotho side. We are going to also get a time release study when it comes to Maseru Bridge in terms of the movement of cargo between us and Lesotho. The issue is we need to bring efficiencies so that businesses as well as business enterprise don't sit at the port and lose money unnecessarily. And the issue is we need to be able to make sure we bring efficiencies. The good thing is all of the various structures that used to be populating the port have actually now been exited. We have a single authority accountable for all the functions. Various standard operating procedures that came from various departments has been done away with. Now we have a single standard operating procedure, and there is efficiency in the port, and we are able to work together with our private partners. So because of time, I suppose I can stop here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
In a sense, our next panel discussion is part 2, really, of the first. I think most of the morning has been setting the scene of what this illicit economy and these illicit financial flows can do to our economy. And so the flip side of that is, how do we support the legal economy? Please let me invite my next panelist, Abram Nelson from the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. Please have a seat. Dr. Graham Wright, Business Against Crime South Africa. And finally, Gregory Singh from Sabric. I don't think we're going to delve too much on what has already been said, but I think the picture is a pretty grim one in terms of what the illicit economy looks like. How then do we support the legal trade? I think one of the things we heard from the Commissioner was just how much we can think of opportunities lost and monies lost because of the illicit economy. I'm going to ask each of you to give me your opening remarks in terms of the question we are seeking to address. Gregory, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Bukan. Is my mic on?
It is?
I think from our point of view, supporting the banking industry, and I agree fully with what the doctor mentioned there, and the other guest speakers, I think the collective cross-sectorial approach in dealing with it, instead of dealing with it in pockets, is critical because every environment has its own expertise. So we need to pull those expertise together and walk the journey not only domestically, but with the rest of Africa. Because if we only do it in South Africa, we're going to leave the SADC region and the rest of Africa behind. So we've got to move together, and more importantly, moving together with law enforcement and all other law enforcement agencies that are fighting this crime. Technology, digitization, innovation, key role players. The banking industry is doing a lot in that. Understanding the criminal value chains, understanding not just how the money flows, but also how the goods flow, to get to the key elements that you actually want to address collectively. And making it difficult. Not necessarily always investigation or prosecutions might be the end goal or the best result, but making it difficult for them to commit the crime. So the disruptive activities, the integrated intelligence sharing that got to happen, and I think one of the ladies mentioned in the other panel, is SAR has documents, but does the banking industry have visibility of those documents? We're fighting this fight together, so there should be some level of access to data and using technology to almost share that documentation and authentication of such documents, because we're not all document experts, right? So we need to have access to those documentation and intelligence in almost real time.
Graham?
Just to preface the comments based on the work that's been going on between government and business, because we've heard today that the issue is very complicated and broad as well, not only locally but internationally as well. But you know, that comes to mind. The issue of partnerships is very important and fundamental to this fight. We just need to recognize that in this country, I think we've got unique partnerships between government and business. That partnership has been initiated by the President in 2023, where he asked business to support government in dealing with some of these critical issues. Now, the three critical issues that were addressed or put on the table was electricity. At that time, load shedding was the big challenge. Second one was logistics, and the third one is crime and corruption. And the crime and corruption includes the illicit economy as well. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be drawn, because you would know as a citizen that the electricity issue has been more or less handled. There's some way to go still, but certainly load shedding has been reduced to zero. And on the similar progress being made on logistics as well. And then on crime and corruption, what we've tended to focus on are some of the complex money laundering issues, and especially satisfying the FATF requirements as well. So, you know, and if you look at the illicit economy, money laundering, illicit money flows is fundamental to dealing with illicit economy. And we've seen through the video how complicated that is. And I think the partnership is really important in terms of how do we deal with that. And one of the issues that we've learned through the process is that business has got incredible skills, innovation, and capability, which can be brought to bear and support government in dealing with these massive issues that government is dealing with. But it has to be done in a partnership mode. We can't have a situation where government is sitting on one side doing certain things, business is on the other side. It has to be a collaborative effort in where the challenges are addressed together with due consideration of the roles and responsibilities of the different parties. Business is not law enforcers. They are providers of specialist skills and capabilities. So that's been very, very important, and that process in itself of how do you partner between government and business is complex as well. And we've been through that process on the crime and corruption front, as well as those other initiatives as well, where we've clearly defined the role of business and also how business supports government. And in this mode, I think the work of Consumer Goods Council and also the other associations as well in that package of illicit economy groupings is very important, where that grouping is ready and able to support. So we're fully supportive of that whole partnership process. I think is fundamental. And I can talk a bit more detail later on once AB's spoken about some specifics that we've addressed. Thanks.
All right, Abraham?
Thank you, Bongani. I would like to start my opening by saying that the legal
Just going to ask you to speak a little. Yeah.
The legal economy is actually under threat from the illicit economy. The illicit economy is fast growing, and it is owned by organized crime syndicates in the country. That's a reality. Their core business is to amass finances, number one, and secondly, corruption in order for them to have access via law enforcement or even up to the level of government officials. So that's the reality that we have to face. The result of that being disinvestment, because nobody's prepared to invest in a country where you have two competing economies, one licit and one illicit. Sustainability of legal businesses becomes a challenge, and this, at the end of the day, leads to loss of jobs. And disinvestment in the country. So it's critical if we look at why we were on the FATF list in the first place, was because of a lack of anti-money laundering successes. We were not able to prevent money laundering taking place in the country. And I think it's critical that we look at it from that angle, because we back off the list, but we don't want to get back onto that list again. So it's critical that we look at how do we then support the legal economy. One area, okay.
No, go ahead.
So there's a couple of areas that I believe we should look at, and it was mentioned in your previous panel. Number one being legislation and regulations. I think when you look at legislation and regulations, it must not hinder business. It must actually support the growth of business in the country. And a lot of the legislation we have, we've got the best in the world, I think. We've got legislation that covers everything. The second problem with our legislation is the enforcement thereof. We've got the laws, we can use the laws, but we're not doing it. We're not using the laws. We focus on the criminal side of things to try and prove somebody guilty of smuggling, for example. But we forget to follow the money, which was also mentioned. So we should do our investigations in parallel. The second part is crime mitigation in the country. South Africa's unfortunately a country where crime is rife, and it deters business. It makes it difficult for businesses to operate in certain areas, to expand, and by expanding, creating jobs and opportunities for people. And then the last part that I think we should look at is what Graham spoke to, the public-private collaboration.
Here's a controversial question, if you will allow me. How much do we assume compliance even amongst what we may term legal business? In other words, bad actors who are using the cloak of legality. I mean, how much have we seen in our own country, multinationals working in the private sector who've become a wrecking ball, our state-owned entities, for example, because of bad players working in malleable economies with avaricious political leaders? How do we deal with that?
That's one of the biggest challenges, and to be honest with you, there are some so-called legal businesses that are actually also doing additional business supporting the illegal economy. The challenge is we need whistleblowing. We need people to start talking. We need people to come out. But once again, the challenge in South Africa, you whistleblow, and at the end of the day, your life becomes a challenge. We don't have the resources to protect whistleblowers. And that's something that we encourage. We've got a policy where we call people to support, for example, the illicit trade and counterfeiting of cigarettes. We're asking people to report. We've even created an anonymous platform for them to report so that we can get the information and it can be made available to law enforcement. So that is one big challenge, and I'm not sure how we're going to get around that, but that is something we have to look at.
Would a financial incentive work for whistleblowers? I mean, I at the start of this week, I interviewed somebody who has been mentioned quite publicly by the former Home Affairs Minister, Dr. Motsoaledi, who talked about this Mr. T chap who'd been an anti-corruption crusader within Home Affairs. We interviewed him. He met us at a secret location. And one of the things he said, which was quite striking, he says, in most cases, whistleblowers are protected until they testify. And once you've testified and the information or evidence you've provided has been made available, you're on your own. And I wonder if there is some scope, and perhaps through the private sector, where there's some kind of financial incentive, obviously with the proper checks and balances around the veracity of information provided. Would that work?
Yeah, that would definitely work, and I'm speaking on behalf of the private sector. I'm sure that the private sector would be willing to make that type of resources available to assist. The biggest challenge is the corruption from within. You can have the incentive, you can help to a point, but if these syndicates are able to infiltrate, they are able to get people inside to expose the identities of these whistleblowers, that's where the big challenge actually lies.
Graham, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think the whistleblowing is something that needs to be improved. We've heard about that earlier on, but also the intelligence, actionable intelligence gathering, and taking that intelligence and doing something with it is a really important part as well. And that is where I think we as a business and government community can actually improve. But that intelligence should lead then to legitimate businesses or so-called legitimate businesses that are not playing the right game. And then there should be investigations following on from that. But that's where our weakness is at the moment.
The Commissioner spoke about border management having previously been all these players really sort of duplicating functions with no clear person in charge. Is there a way perhaps for legal business to be streamlined in terms of regulations, reducing bureaucracy, making it easy for business to do what business wants to do? Is that part of the problem?
The logistics program that we've been running between government and business over the last 2 years has involved the management of those trucks that go across the Lubombo border, for example. And one of the key factors there has been the partnership between business and especially the freight industry, where they are able to control and manage the flow of trucks going to the border based on the congestion that's been experienced there. So they can manage the flow of goods based on the challenges that exist. And that actually then streamlines the flow at the end of the day. But it just reinforces that view that if you collaborate and you work together, you can draw from the strengths of business as well in dealing with that. But more specifically, there are solutions in the private sector that if you position it well and correctly within the government sector, you can actually then deploy those solutions at border control. And I'm sure the Commissioner is very aware of that as well, which would then automate many of these processes and take out the human element, because that's where our vulnerability lies. Automation and the use of intelligences are really critical.
Gregory, I imagine the banking sector has quite a role to play here.
Yes, sure, Bongani. And I just want to comment on cash flows, because it was mentioned previously. We got to firstly understand that these entities tend to hide and conceal their transactions. So to detect it from a banking point of view, as this is money laundering, is always quite difficult. So it's critical for us to start sharing the typologies around what the different elements utilize within this environment, so we can better understand how the transactional flows take place, not just within the banking industry, but moving on to your CASP environment, that's your crypto environment, moving on to your money remitters. I think one of the gentlemen spoke about the money remitters and the challenges there. Yes, that is a challenge. And we need to see how do we bring all those parties in the ecosystem of cash flow together to say, listen, what do we see, how do we address it, what measures we put in place to complement business as well as law enforcement.
Are there, shall we call them own goals, where legal entities have created incentives for the illicit economy? Are there mistakes perhaps that we can think about in terms of how the business environment operates?
I wouldn't say they are. I don't think they are. Because I think businesses want to make profit. It is what it is. They're there to make profit as much as possible, but in the process, reinvest into the country, expand, create more jobs, create more opportunities. So I don't think that exists. I think the legal justice system is not a deterrent for these criminal syndicates. So you can get arrested. You make sure you get bail for 2 or 3 or 4 different crimes at the same time. You get bail. I mean, it's that easy. You're actually unlucky if you don't get bail in this country today. Then the case proceeds and you get found guilty, which is also not a problem. Because then the sentence you get does not fit the crime. So there's no deterrent for these guys. They get a fine. Somebody mentioned it earlier. They give you a fine, 20,000 rand per item, suspended for 5 years. So it's costing you nothing. Some of the fines, they pay because they've got the money to do it. But if you go back a week later, you'll find that that syndicate is operating. So I think that's the part that we need to look at. Our legal system needs to be a deterrent to these criminal syndicates. At the moment, as much as there's a lot of work going into it, a lot of good investigations taking place, at the end of the day, we're still not deterring because of the manner in which the thing ends up at the end of the day.
Perhaps let me give an example of what I meant in my earlier question. Transparency is an issue that has been mentioned, and I wonder if competitive advantage is a sufficient enough reason where there isn't sufficient information sharing, and that perhaps can give an unintended incentive to the illicit economy.
Totally agree with that. And that is why the collaboration between all the stakeholders and role players is so important. We've been working from a CGCSA point of view with Business Against Crime and all other industry bodies. Of course, we've realized that we're dealing with the same animal, we're dealing with the same circumstances. And if we pull together, we become stronger in terms of fighting this battle. So yes, 100%.
I think we need to recognize that the illicit economy is driven by sophisticated organized crime. So on one hand, you can look at the legal economy, but I think we need to deal with the illicit economy and the players behind that. And that is the biggest challenge we have. And that's where the partnership and the skills are required to actually unpack those avenues. We, at Business Against Crime, in partnership with Consumer Goods and others, we've set up a illicit economy desk or work group that we're going to unpack these syndicates in great detail in partnership with the law enforcement agencies. So we're working in partnership with clear boundaries between the roles and responsibilities. But it does take all of the innovation and technology from the private sector to be able to unpack these things, these syndicates, and also working with the banking industry as well in terms of the innovations that the banking industry can bring to bear. So it's very easy to say we need to improve law enforcement, but how do we do that? And the complexities and the commitments that's required to actually achieve that is something different.
What about the issue of political will? As a media practitioner, I'm guilty of the same. We'll often describe people as businessmen who may be linked, if you've been following the news cycle of late, linked to political figures, for example, but no one can quite explain what business these people actually do. But if we drill down some of this to things like extortion rackets, for example, and how that complicates doing business legally in South Africa, and even right down to the tender system. Surely there are questions to be raised even there.
I think the tender system and extortion rackets, these are pervasive problems across the country. The extortion mechanisms and rackets that are carrying on has actually grown almost like the hyacinth that you find in the dam. It's uncontrolled at this point in time, and the law enforcement agencies are working very hard at doing that, and that's partnership with business once again. But one has to understand the mechanisms, the modus operandi, how these syndicates operate, and then how do you actually put a proper kill chain in place that would actually address that issue.
But to Abraham's point a little earlier on, I mean, how disheartening is it? Now, whether it's, I mean, at this point, obviously, it's merely an allegation, but the idea that the number 2 cop in the land goes to Parliament to answer questions in a process that's meant to address allegations of criminality within law enforcement with a chap as part of his security detail who has 18 convictions, including hijacking. How do you begin to make sense of that? The number 2 cop in the land. Allegedly.
That's just a remark, not a question.
It's difficult to entertain that conversation because at the moment it's allegations. But the point I was trying to make, those are the challenges. So there is no deterrent for these organized criminal syndicates because they see what's happening, they hear what's happening, and they realize, but this is easy to actually do. And that is why it's growing and growing.
But the point I'm making also is we can have all the regulations we want. We can talk about the tender system, we can talk about extortion rackets, but if law enforcement itself is compromised, where do we begin?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. You have to have a committed, legally sound law enforcement body that's doing its job, and there's no question about that.
All right, let me not hold the conversation. I promise to take a lot more questions because many of the problem statements have already been outlined quite clearly. Any questions from the room?
Comments?
Commissioner? Let me put you on the spot. I mean, you're doing what you can from your point of view. What is it that you'd like business to hear?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You still are? You're still mic'd?
No, that's great. You see, I think he has just been indicating the kind of partnerships that the country has started doing, you know, with the private enterprise. So as he had indicated, the president actually created the NLCC, which is the National Logistic Crisis Committee, which I happen to chair, Workstream 2, that deals with the activities at the ports. So on that basis, I think one of the fundamentals that we've been, in a way, you know, pushing in that particular space is to be able to say that we have to work together and ultimately, you know, build the country, you know, collectively. In as much as we agree with the principle, I think my colleague had indicated that business enterprise is here, obviously, to make money. But there are instances where you find that government is just struggling. And in the midst of it being struggling, I suppose we then need to be able to say, how do we then bring the effort together and try to get out of what looks like a crisis with the view that things will stabilize and then we will reactivate the making money. So for me, that is the aspect. The good thing is, because of the NLCC example, as I'm saying, there is already now some element of trust, you know, between government and the private sector. And with my experience, we have actually been working together. You might have also observed before, if there were to be issues, for example, around the port, the private sector would, for example, go out into the public space or the media to be able to say, yeah, so there is, in other words, kind of throwing stones to the government side, government will try to throw stones back. So one of the things that we have tried to push is the fact that no, there is no need to throw stones at each other. We have the same interest to serve. In any event, we are all staying in glass houses. So if we continue doing that, none of us is going to actually benefit. So that has created some element of agreement that we need to partner. Even as I'm talking to you now, we are dealing with some issues in the port space. But because we are working with the private sector, you don't see much of that situation where there is too much of and it's because of those kind of partnerships.
So how do we take that learning? It's one thing to deal with logistics bottlenecks, for example, but how do we deal with that in terms of our current topic, supporting the legal economy against crime?
So my response to that is, under the net joints, besides the NLCC, there's quite a few priority crime committees that have been established. So for example, there's an infrastructure priority crime committee, there's the extortion priority crime committee, which is a collaboration between law enforcement as well as the private sector. So from a net joints point of view, I think the idea is there, it's being implemented, and as we identify, so the extortion one, for example, focuses on the kidnapping and extortion as well as extortions at commercial sites where people are building roads and that type of thing. So the idea has been planted. I think it just needs to be strengthened more because like the commissioner just said now, once we sit together in these priority crime committees, the trust gets built and we start working together, and business then is willing to invest to assist where government may be running short.
Yeah, I think the key issue is trust, building the trust. And then also through those priority committees to define specifically what needs to be addressed. And you've got to be absolutely specific about that and what timelines as well needed to be given and what resources are required from both government and business. Because we found in the partnership initiative, if we are not sufficiently resourcing initiatives, then we actually don't achieve what we need to achieve. And we've got to get commitments on resources before we start. And that there has to be a governance structure associated with that, where at the highest level, both within government and business, the process is monitored and the governance is correct. So all of those lessons can be drawn from the B4SA government initiative, and those are in place already. So I think everything is ready, and the consumer goods initiative intention is to mirror that, as I understand it. But there's a lot of rigor that we need to put in place, and the resources is the fundamental issue.
Thank you, Bongani. I would say also, just to add on to what Dr. Graham is saying, is that I think where we can work smarter, we should. Where we can utilize joint resources, then looking for resources outside, so we can use the private sector to complement the public sector, and vice versa. Also, the skills transfer, we can do it in country. If the doctor is having, or the commissioner is having operations at the port, we can send the right skills to the port to assist him. We can facilitate that, so that the skill set is there to look for the right type of good, the right type of vehicle or asset coming or leaving the country.
And forgive me for going back to this thing of things being cloaked in some veil of legality. Could there, for example, be an opportunity to lobby for legislative changes? I mean, the extortion issue, whatever the intention was around local procurement and 30%, it has obviously very clearly morphed into something that nobody can justify. Are there opportunities to have conversations around how something like that could operate in the future?
Definitely. As Graham said earlier, we've started this project on the illicit economy. And one of the work streams focuses on the legislation and how we can engage with the relevant authorities for them to review and maybe even change some of the legislation based on the motivation. And in general, as an association, we do when regulations get published which affects business and our members, we generally then do submissions to government to say, but this legislation is going to create a negative effect. One that I can mention openly is the new CIRA regulations that were issued, I think it was late last year. And if you look at that, it's an impractical regulation. It doesn't make sense. So we have submitted, you know, our points on it. And I think it's on hold now because it was issued by the Minister of Police, who's now on leave. So it's
Who now has other problems.
Yeah, now the problems are getting worse, yeah. So yes, the opportunity is there to ensure that we can do that.
I think the challenge we have is the illicit economy is growing at a pace that
It's not waiting.
we don't understand. Already, you know, cigarettes are, as you say, 70-75% illicit. So we don't have time to wait for things to happen. So the priority should be that both government and business acknowledge this as an area of deep concern and requiring immediate action. And that requires lobbying at a political level as well to get the alignment from the Treasury through to law enforcement agencies as well. So that lobbying needs to take place both within government and business so that there's alignment and agreement of the priority. And that was, if you go back to the President's initiative, those three areas were agreed by business and government as being national priorities. So, you know, I think that's the starting point. And then the legislation, all the other issues that we need to attend to can be packaged into the work streams, as AB says. But, you know, I think one needs to make sure that whatever we start has an end point, and we're not going to take too long, and there needs to be a critical path. We've learned about critical paths in this workshop work that we've been doing with government. We've got to define that critical path very carefully, what milestones and outcomes we need at what time, and who's responsible for what. And all of that learning is embedded in the country at the moment between the partnerships.
I mean, Graham, in a way, you've kind of taken us to where I think we should end this conversation off, and I'll give you, Gregory, the next opportunity. Let's go back to our initial question. How do we support the legal economy? If Graham is talking about critical pathways, if he's talking about speed, what is your one word, if you will, or a key takeout you want to leave the room with?
Bongani, I will say, I just have 2 points to put forward.
Of course.
Here. One, I think consumer education is critical here because the persons utilizing those goods we're talking about need to know what they're getting themselves involved in and the dangers around it and how it impacts. The second one will be coming to AB's point in if we want to lobby for legislation, yes, we can have it all done nice and comfortably in South Africa, but the impact to the businesses here is outside South Africa. And we need to try and harmonize the legislation outside or within the SADC region.
All right, on that word, we will leave it. A round of applause and our appreciation to our panelists. And like earlier, of course, we have a little token of appreciation for your participation in our panel.